Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
Happy Monday. It is Monday, June 29, 2026, here on EWTN's Catholic Connection. Great to be with you. Hope you had a restful and peaceful weekend. And what a week this is, brothers and sisters across the United States of America, and for those around the world who follow us here at EWTN. For the U.S. of A., we'll be marking this weekend our 250th birthday, something to which we've been building for many, many months, especially from a Catholic perspective. We'll be talking about that this week and so much more. On Friday, we will have a very special edition of Catholic Connection and many other special programs, as you heard Peter Gagnon, our president of EWTN Studios, mention on Friday. So many wonderful faith-filled events going on this week, and we do have Friday off for the holiday, but we will bring you great programming nonetheless, and we are recording a number of wonderful interviews for our Catholic Connection edition, a special edition for Friday morning. Just something, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but just keep that in mind as we move through this fantastic week of a very special time for America. Coming up on the program today, we are going to be chatting with Michael New. He's a regular here on EWTN's Catholic Connection, talking about the Dobbs decision. Can you believe we had 4 years of this already? 4-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. Thanks be to God. June 24th, the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. So what has that meant the past few years? Well, he'll give us an update and his take on this. He is the Senior Associate Scholar at the wonderful Charlotte Lozier Institute. He's also Assistant Professor of Practice at the Catholic University of America and writes regularly for National Review and other publications. So Michael New joining us for the first part of the show. Now, we sat down to record a very special interview with Steve Ray on this important solemnity, feast day of Saints Peter and Paul. And he was traveling today, so he couldn't join us live. So we sat down and did a very great interview. He has such great background, and he did a wonderful comparison to these two giants of the faith, of course, St. Paul and St. Peter. I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, speaking of this solemnity, of course, this is a very big day here in Rome with the pallium of so many archbishops from America and around the world meeting with the Pope today, a special mass. We'll have more on that in the news. But as I was telling Anna Mitchell on the Sunrise Morning Show this morning, it is brutally hot here, brutally warm. And I can't even imagine, well, I can actually, because I was in Rome last week, how warm it is in Rome. It's still very, very warm. And if you are coming to Europe anytime soon, they're still in the middle of a heat wave. I know we're going to be getting one fairly soon as well, so keep that in mind. Gail Buckley-Behringer will be joining us, as she always does, for our Scripture Verse of the Week, and that will conclude our first hour of Catholic Connection on a busy Monday. Hour number 2 in our 2 cents segment. Something that has always really driven me quite crazy and gotten my Italian up is this misunderstanding about the First Amendment and how so many people wrongly, very incorrectly, stick the phrase separation of church and state into the First Amendment or the Establishment Clause. That is not in the First Amendment. Nowhere is it in the Constitution. And yet, that phrase, which is originally from a letter that was written by Thomas Jefferson, is used to beat and batter believers. And it has been for the past, I don't know how many decades. And there is a special religious committee that was put together by the current administration, and the wonderful Bishop Barron was a part of that, along with many other notable folks in politics and in faith. And they did issue their report on Friday. So we're going to play a clip from that. But I do want to talk about that a little bit in terms of what's happened. There's been such a misunderstanding. Even in the media, if you look at the stories that were written the past few days since that religious committee came out with their final report and the 12 recommendations, it's unbelievable. And I'm reading this, and I'm reading it out loud to Deacon Dom, and I'm like, did they even look up and double check the First Amendment and Google it, for crying out loud? No. They just continued to repeat and repeat and repeat an untruth and facts that, well, they didn't stick to the facts, quite frankly. All right, so that will be our 2 cents segment. Then we'll have a delightful interview with Father Joseph Spence, who's going to be in studio with us this morning in the second hour on EWTN's Radio Extra, about his new book, Living by the Teaching of St. Therese. Living the Little Way, actually. That's the official title, with the subtitle being 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. So look forward to that as well. Not looking forward to the heat, though. Dangerous to record-breaking heat will be building across the center of the country this week and also going eastward. They're saying wildfire conditions, according to the National Weather Service, are remaining critical for the Southwest, as well as portions of the Great Basin throughout today. And for the northern plains and upper Midwest, severe thunderstorms with the potential for large to very large hail and severe winds are serious hazards about which the experts are very concerned. Right now, it's already 5 minutes past the hour. We appreciate you here on EWTN on a Monday and every day here on the network. Now, let's check the news on EWTN at 5 minutes past the hour. Well, rescue efforts continuing in Venezuela as officials fear the death toll will continue to rise from last week's massive earthquakes. More than 1,400 people are confirmed dead, and nearly 69,000 others remain missing. Meanwhile, search and rescue teams from the U.S. and around the world are working to find victims in the collapsed buildings. The State Department says the U.S. is sending $150 million in aid packages to Venezuela, with more financial help likely to follow. And we'll talk more about this in the second hour of Catholic Connection. The Religious Liberty Commission, established by the President, presented its recommendations on Friday. The panel was created last year in an effort to, according to the group, stop the suppression of people of religion in this country. The group's chair, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, said the phrase separation of church and state, which is not in the First Amendment but mentioned in a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, has been misused to punish people of faith. One of the group's recommendations is for the Justice Department to instruct proper guidance of the Establishment Clause. Pope Leo delivering a special video message to Catholics across the U.S. at the conclusion of the 2026 National Eucharistic Pilgrimage, according to EWTNnews.com. That will mark a historic moment as the nation celebrates, as we mentioned earlier, the 250th anniversary of our founding. The Pope's message will be shown on Sunday at the opening of the closing Mass and the Eucharistic procession in Philadelphia, where thousands of pilgrims are expected to gather after a 6-week journey across the eastern part of the country. According to organizers, the Pope's address will reflect on the legacy of Catholicism in the U.S., while encouraging the faithful to seek renewed unity, peace, and hope through Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Meanwhile, during the Mass for the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, Pope Leo XIV invited the faithful to be inspired by the two patrons of Rome who, despite their flaws, became extraordinary witnesses to the gospel. He also invites the new metropolitan archbishops receiving their pallium to imitate the Lord and be good shepherds to the faithful entrusted to them. Looking to the saints, the Holy Father is suggesting that we can learn how to celebrate the ancient and moving rite of the conferring of the pallia on the metropolitan archbishops. He says those bands of white wool adorned with crosses indeed express a commitment of every shepherd and also of every Christian to take upon their shoulders their brothers and sisters entrusted to them. He added, like so many lambs of the Lord's flock, and to sacrifice their energy, time, effort, and even their lives for them. In other news this morning, the U.S. and Iran have agreed to stand down temporarily and allow ships to move freely through the Strait of Hormuz. That's according to a U.S. official. The official saying technical discussions will continue over the weekend, more specifically on Friday, Iran asserting control over the strait, warning that safe passage would only be guaranteed for vessels coordinating with its government. The escalation followed President Trump's accusation that Iran struck a commercial ship near Oman with a one-way attack drone, prompting U.S. Central Command to launch additional retaliatory strikes. Mike Waltz says the U.S. will militarily take down Iran's infrastructure if Tehran tries to control the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. ambassador to the UN made the comments during his appearance on Fox News Sunday, adding that discussions between the two countries are ongoing and that the president will always give diplomacy a chance. This, as the U.S. and Iran, as you just heard, have been trading attacks. In a post on Truth Social over the weekend, the president wrote, "There may come a point where we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully already began." And a memorial service will be taking place today for the 8 people who died when a B-52 bomber crashed 2 weeks ago at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The B-52 aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff on June 15th while on a routine test mission. The cause of the crash remains under investigation. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's sending the bipartisan housing bill to President Trump today. Johnson making that comment during an appearance on Fox Sunday Morning Futures after the president canceled the planned signing of the bill last week. The bill, meant to cut away some of the red tape and make it easier to build homes, sailed through the House and Senate and was set to be signed by Trump last week before the ceremony was canceled. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said he would not sign the measure until the Save America Act is passed. The voting bill would require ID in order to vote. And 3 U.S. Wildland Fire Service firefighters have been killed battling raging fires across the Colorado-Utah border. Officials say 2 other crew members are hospitalized with injuries while fighting the flames on Saturday. 2 smaller fires are now part of the larger Snyder Fire, which is burning over 28,000 acres and is so far 0% contained, this as of last night. The governors of both Colorado and Utah declaring emergencies due to the red flag conditions, with winds gusting to 50 miles per hour across the region. And we've been talking about this in the weather, of course. A mega heat dome is set to hit the eastern half of the country this week and last well throughout the big 4th of July holiday weekend. Forecasters say 2 small heat domes will be colliding, and they say that will make for one large heat dome that will then send the temperatures soaring. Today, cities including Minneapolis, St. Louis, Chicago, to as far south as Little Rock, Arkansas, could see those temperatures hit the high 90s. The dome will then be expanding and intensifying by midweek, and other cities including Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., and more could hit the triple digits. And the news, unfortunately, gets worse. The mega heat dome could spark tropical storm development near the southern U.S. and the Atlantic and in the Gulf. And the shingles vaccine may provide significant protection from dementia in older adults. That's according to a study out of Brown University School of Public Health in Rhode Island. The lead author, Dr. Kaylee Hughes, finding that 1 in 17 dementia cases could possibly be prevented by the shingles vaccination. It's an important finding, they say, because according to the Centers for Disease Control, 99% of Americans born in 1980 or earlier had chickenpox, which is caused by a particular virus, a virus that actually triggers both chickenpox and painful shingles. And Amazon customers, well, you have a month left to file that claim in the company's $2.5 billion settlement with the Federal Trade Commission. Those who are eligible may receive up to $51. The settlement comes from a 2023 lawsuit alleging Amazon coerced consumers into enrolling in Prime subscriptions and then made it hard to cancel. The window to submit a claim closes on July 27th, and it's a second phase of payouts in the settlement. In the first, eligible customers received automatic payments last year. It is a Monday morning. It's June 29th, 2026. Great to be with you on a Monday and every day here at EWTN's Catholic Connection. It's been 4 years since the Dobbs decision, believe it or not. Michael New, who is, of course, an expert with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, will be joining us to discuss. He's also an assistant professor of practice at Catholic U. And then Steve Ray weighs in on this beautiful solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. And then our scripture verse of the week, and that's all in the first hour coming up. Don't touch that dial, as we say in Radio Land. It's a Monday, and we're glad to be with you here on EWTN. Stay tuned. Morning. It is June 29th, 2026. You know, it's funny. I just gave a lecture, a 2-hour lecture last week to students at the EWTN Summer Academy, which was fantastic, by the way, as I mentioned. I think I mentioned it on Fact Check Friday. And one of the biggest things I told them, and Tom Price, by the way, is filling in for my producer, Richard, and Tom and I go way back, and both here at EWTN and, of course, our many, many years in secular media. And you have to have that Boy Scouts approach of being prepared and always be, ready to, as we say, vamp. Or talk about something, because oftentimes things happen. Technology doesn't work, and maybe it's the heat, but we're having a little bit of an issue back at the ranch in Irondale. So I did this actually as a good thing, though. God works in strange ways. The Lord works in mysterious ways, because I really wanted to talk and spend more time than I actually have in the second hour of the program regarding this fascinating and very important commission that was put together by the current administration, including the amazing Bishop Barrett, Robert Barron, who I just think the world of. He's just an amazing communicator and a great evangelist for us in the church and beyond. He was one of the members of this Religious Liberty Commission. And what I found so fascinating was what they stressed in their press conference on Friday. I don't know if you saw any of the coverage, EWTN News Nightly, EWTNnews.com, the National Register. We all covered it, and each outlet has excellent reports. But the biggest point they made about the issues is a misunderstanding of Amendment 1, which is known as either the First Amendment or the Establishment Clause. So many people over the years, and especially in the 20th and 21st centuries, the past 50, 60, 70 years, have misused a phrase that was nowhere, still is nowhere in the Constitution. And that phrase is separation of church and state. And if you go into this amazing report and you read some of the testimony, they had audio, they have video, but you can actually read the transcript. If you read the transcript of some of these witnesses that testified, it's frightening. Over and over and over again, they use the so-called Establishment Clause, or the misunderstanding of it, to basically beat people up for their religion. Tried to claim that they were violating separation of church and state in the Constitution. And as I was telling you at the top of the hour, when I was doing some research and looking at the report and listening to the press conference on Friday, doing prep for the program this morning, I'm pulling up other stories, right? And I'm reading what the secular media are saying. And they still are getting it wrong. Still getting it wrong. They're still strongly stating, and not all of them, but most of them, I would say, in terms of the reports that I reviewed in the last couple of days, are still believing that the actual words separation of church and state are in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment. And it's nowhere in the Constitution. They took a phrase, and if you go back and listen to the press conference, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, mentions this. They use that phrase that comes from one of the many letters written by Thomas Jefferson. This one, I believe, was 1802 to the establishment, to the Danbury Baptist Association, saying that, no, you can't establish a particular religion for a government because there has to be a wall of separation between church and state. It was in his letter, his words, not in the Constitution. And yet, that phrase, as Lieutenant Governor Patrick said in that press conference, has been used repeatedly to batter people and bully them into thinking that somehow they were violating the U.S. Constitution. I'll have a clip from that hopefully in the second hour of the program, but you can just look it up. Just look up Religious Liberty Commission and the report, or go to one of our resources, because we have hyperlinks in all of those stories. Especially I got mine from the National Catholic Register report. So they came out with 12 recommendations, which I think are great. And so we do have our guest right now. We'll go to Michael New. But in the meantime, I would really encourage you. You can go to justice.gov/religious liberty, or you can go to, as I mentioned, the National Catholic Register. You can go to EWTNnews.com, or look at the report from EWTN News Nightly on Friday. We all have links, hyperlinks, to this very important Religious Liberty report that came out on Friday. They came up with 12 recommendations to strengthen religious liberty for all Americans. Number 1, and then I'll get to Michael, instructing the Department of Justice to issue guidelines clarifying the proper understanding of the Establishment Clause and separation of church and state. So there you go. More next hour on EWTN Radio Extra. Michael, sorry for the delay. Early happy 4th of July to you. Thanks for joining us. So I cannot believe that it's been 4 years already since the Dobbs decision. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
All right, your thoughts 4 years later. How are we doing? What do you think?
Well, we were never promised a smooth glide path to victory. I mean, we scored an important victory with Dobbs. The judicial battle, I mean, it's largely won, but there's other battles we have to fight. We have to win political battles. We have to change public opinion. And most importantly, we have to change the culture. And those are things we're not making as much progress on as we could. A lot of good come out of the Dobbs decision. I mean, we have 17 or so states with strong pro-life laws in effect. I've just studied with the Loesch Institute. We're analyzing birth data. You see birth rate increases in these states. So these laws are having some incremental good. They are saving tens of thousands of lives. The Dobbs decision, that would be possible without the Dobbs decision. That said, we face a lot of challenges. Telehealth abortions are a big challenge. They're weakening these laws. We have to win some of these state ballot propositions. So some goods come out of it, but we still it's not the final victory. We still have a lot to do as pro-lifers.
We saw some of these very extreme amendments in my home state, Michigan, was ground zero. Do you see that as a direct result of the left trying to fight the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision?
Yes, I do. That I think that when it comes to direct democracy, our opponents do have some advantages. I mean, I've done research on direct democracy as a political scientist, and one thing we find pretty consistently is that just the side that spends the most money wins. And sadly, abortion is a multi-billion-dollar industry in this country. The other side can put millions of dollars into ballot campaigns, and sometimes pro-lifers just don't have the resources to keep up. So even in sort of right-of-center states like Ohio, and Missouri, we've seen the other side get these ballot propositions through and put abortion in the state constitution. That said, pro-lifers have won some battles. I mean, we did win in Florida. We did win in Nebraska. We did win in South Dakota. So it's not insurmountable. We just have to be savvy, smart, raise money, run good campaigns. Victories are achievable.
It's interesting, though, because I think sometimes we can get comfortable and sit on our laurels. But the minute it was overturned, were there too many of us, do you think, or maybe a few in key positions that were taking too much for granted that this was going to be somewhat smooth sailing from that point on?
I think that we were pretty clear-eyed. I realized that the decision would do a lot of good in the South and parts of the Midwest where we could pass strong pro-life laws, but I realized that preventing preborn children in places like California and New York, that was going to be a heavy lift, no matter what happened. So I was aware it was going to do some incremental good, but it was far from over. It reminds me of what Winston Churchill once said,
right.
This is not the end. It's not the beginning of the end, but maybe will be the end of the beginning. So no one could predict perfectly what the next 4 years would bring, but I realized that we still had our work cut out for us. I do think some elected officials, and I hate to say it, maybe some donors kind of viewed Dobbs as a final victory, and that hasn't helped. But those of us who work in the movement, who are savvy politically, we realize that we still had work to do.
So going into, we have about a minute left, Michael, quickly, going into the midterms, what can we as pro-lifers do you think? What are we looking forward to? What can we work on in the next couple of months?
Well, it'd be important for Republicans to hold the majority in the House and Senate. I mean, we need to pass the Hyde Amendment again, make sure the Medicaid isn't funding elective abortions. We have ballot campaigns in states like Virginia and Nevada and Idaho. We have to win there. Also, Missouri, there's a good chance they're going to succeed in getting abortion out of the state constitution through a ballot campaign. The early polling looks positive. So there's 4 states with direct democracy campaigns. We need to be on the ground in those states, support those efforts financially, vote for good pro-life people. And again, this is a long haul. We just have to keep maintaining a strong effort.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Look forward to having you on again. Michael J. New, Assistant Professor of Practice at the Busch School of Business at Catholic University and a Senior Associate Scholar at the pro-life organization, the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Something beautiful to focus on this week. Feast of St. Peter and Paul, the official day, June 29th. So why do we have a feast day for them together? Well, to answer those questions and to really take a deep dive into these two amazing saints. And when you're in Rome, you pretty much always see them together, especially if you're at the Vatican. It is the one, the only Steve Ray, author, speaker, fearless pilgrimage leader, and also, of course, our friend. And he does so much great work. And he is here to talk about Saints Peter and Paul. Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm doing very good, Teresa. Always nice to hear your voice.
And so why do we have a feast day for them together? First question.
Because they were martyred on the same day, on June 29th in roughly 67 A.D. I made a movie on Peter, filmed all on location, and I also filmed another one on Paul, all on location. So I feel like I kind of got to know these guys from where they were born to where they died. And one of the interesting things about them being together is that ancient Rome, everybody knows the story that ancient Rome was founded by two twins, Romulus and Remus.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, it's a myth, but back in the 771 BC. And that is the story in Rome everywhere. You see the she-wolf with those two twins, Romulus and Remus, drinking the milk. And this is the founding of the Roman Empire, and the way the Christians viewed it is that Peter and Paul were the twins, kind of the same way, not physically twins, but they were the twin brothers who came to Rome, shed their blood, and they founded the Christian Rome, the church in Rome, and established her there. So you've got two sets of twins, one that established the ancient city of Rome, and another set of twins that established the church in Rome, the new Roman Empire, so to speak. So that's why you have them together. They are considered that they shed their blood together on the same day, and they laid the foundation for the Catholic Church. So that's why they're together. And Theresa, one of the funny thing is that when I was a Protestant, I used to kind of think of Paul as the Protestant apostle and Peter as the Catholic apostle. And it played out because I said faith alone, Bible alone, that's Paul, and Peter is the Pope, and that's Catholic. So, and that we would put them as adversaries. And so there is one place where it says that Peter was confronted by Paul. Paul confronted him to his face because he stood condemned. He was being hypocritical. So that there was this attitude that Peter and Paul were hostile to each other, which is not the case at all when you take it all the context. I also wrote a book called Upon This Rock.
Yeah, which is a great book.
Peter and, and in there I show that they were not hostile at all, that Peter was actually considered to be the head of the church. Paul respected that authority, and even when he referred to Peter, multiple times he referred to him as Cephas, which is the word for rock. And so he would say, I went up to Jerusalem to see the rock. If he was enemies, he would have said, I went up to see Simon, his original name. But he didn't. He says, I went up to see the rock. So you could demonstrate from Scripture the great camaraderie and teamwork of these two, and yet Paul still recognized Peter as the head of the church.
Well, quick question. I know we've got some real specifics to get to, but when you saw that in Scripture in your Baptist or non-Catholic days, going up to see the rock, isn't that pretty obvious what was meant in terms of on this rock you shall build my church?
Well, we were looking through Protestant tainted glasses. They're like sunglasses with Protestant tint to them. So everything that we read, I remember even my mom one time saying, I can't understand all the verses. Some of them just don't fit, so I put them on the shelf. Well, what that means is that we viewed, instead of viewing our life and our tradition through the lens of Scripture, as Baptists, I have to say that we interpreted Scripture through the lens of our Baptist tradition. So when you do that, when you wear sunglasses, blue-tinted sunglasses, everything you see looks blue. And when you wear Protestant or Baptist glasses, everything looks Baptist. And so when you read the Bible, things like that don't jump out at you. And if they do, there's always a way to, with great gymnastics and gyrations, work your way around those passages.
Yeah. If you're just joining us on Catholic Connection, having a very wonderful and insightful conversation with Steve Ray, our dear friend who joins us on a regular basis, and you hear him and see him quite a bit on EWTN Radio and TV. His website is CatholicConvert.com. He is an author, he is a speaker, and he is an expert on all things Catholic, a great apologist and a dear friend. Steve, can we talk about, we have about 3 minutes left before the first break, but I want to talk about the two churches where the sites where St. Peter and St. Paul were martyred, because the churches there now are magnificent. Obviously, St. Peter's Basilica, but then there's also, I don't know how many people have been to Tre Fontani. I mean, you've taken us there. That is a really, really powerful spot, too.
I always make sure that we go to Tre Fontane because most people don't even know it exists. And it's the place where Paul was beheaded. The two churches, of course, are over the bones of Peter and over the bones of Paul. They're the two largest churches in Rome. St. Peter's is the largest church in the world, actually. And they're built over the bones of those apostles. So the story of those churches actually begins in 67 AD at their martyrdom when they were both martyred. I'll just do it real quick because I think we got about 2 minutes left. But Peter and Paul were both in the Mamertine prison, which is in the Roman Forum. And it was a nasty, dank, wicked prison that even Julius Caesar dispensed of his enemies in. It's a cistern under the ground, a hole that you drop them down into this nasty pit. And that's where Peter and Paul spent their last days of their life. And believe me, nobody ever sent a janitorial crew down to clean that place. They were sleeping in years and years of dried excrement from other prisoners, and it was just a horrid place to be. And one misty morning, they were both pulled out together, and they took Peter because he was not a Roman citizen, and he could be crucified. They took him into Nero's circus, which was on the other side of the Tiber River, which is where St. Peter's is today. And they crucified him upside down. We know right where the spot was. And he was crucified in the shadow of that great obelisk that's in the center of St. Peter's. That obelisk witnessed the martyrdom of Peter. And he was crucified upside down, and he was buried on the hillside there. And later Constantine moved Vatican Hill. He moved it, and he built it over where the ground is of the Vatican now, because that's where Peter was buried. Instead of moving the bones, he moved a whole landscaping, put St. Peter's, and built it over the top of St. Peter's bones. So much for Jesus saying, it will build my church upon you, right? The rock. Now, on the other hand, Paul is taken out of there, down to Via Ostia, outside the city gates on the other side of Rome, and they couldn't crucify him because he was a Roman citizen. So they beheaded him. And Tre Fontane in Italian means three fountains. Yep, and they beheaded Paul out there, and his head bounced 3 times, and each place a fountain of water sprang from the ground. And you can still see those fountains today where they are under 3 altars. And he was buried. Then the Church of St. Paul outside the walls was built over his bones. And I hear the music.
Yep, there you go. Thanks, Steve. We'll be back with more on the lives and, of course, the martyrdom and the feast day, June 29th. Very important feast days. We wrap up the month of June. Steve Ray with us talking about the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. We'll be right back. Fasten your seatbelts. We are going to get some very exciting news, taking a ride through the lives and the deaths of the great Saints Peter and Paul. Their feast day, very important feast day this week, June 29th. Steve Ray, the one, the only with us, CatholicComfort.com, author, speaker, fearless pilgrimage leader, and Catholic apologist. All right, so let's talk about how they were similar and different.
Well, they were both very strong Jews, raised in the tradition of the Mosaic Law, under the influence of Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes. And they both had a great love for God and for the faith of Israel, but they had very different lives. One was very educated, Paul, and his name was actually Saul. He had 2 names. People think he got a new name, Paul, when he was converted, but that's not the case. He had 2 names from birth. His Roman name was Paul because he had a Roman citizenship through his father. His Jewish name was Saul. He was named after the first king of Israel, who was head and shoulders above all other men in Israel and very handsome, and he was chosen to be the first king. Funny thing is that even though he was head and shoulders, his namesake, Saul, was a short little guy, and he wasn't very handsome. So that's kind of the funny little thing there. But he had 2 names from birth, a Jewish name and a Roman name. Peter, his name was Simon, from one of the 12 tribes of Israel, Simeon. That's where he got his name. And he had a second name too, but he didn't have that until Jesus called him. And we know that from the first time Jesus met him in John chapter 1, verse 42. He says, "Oh, you will be Cephas." You will be the rock. That's what he told. And Peter probably looked at the guys and said, "What is that? What's he mean by that? What's that all about?" But he found out 3 years later when Jesus officially named him Peter the Rock. So he had two names too. They were very different in the sense that, even back in those days, they calculate that roughly 3% of the people were literate. At the most, 10% could sign their name or do a receipt for purchasing a bag of flour or something, but at least 90% of the people were illiterate, and they considered that most of the people up in the Galilee area were illiterate. That's why scribes had such power, because they could read and write, and they had access to these things. That's why they had such clout and such power. But you can think of this. Paul was raised in that world, in an academic world, under Gamaliel, the great rabbi. In fact, they call him Rabbon, which means our rabbi. Even today, he's known as that. And you have here the best and the brightest of the students seated at the foot of the best and the brightest of the rabbis. And whereas Paul smelled like books, Peter smelled like fish. He lived up in Galilee. He was not an academic. He was a businessman. And I think he was a good businessman and a civic leader, because his house was right between the synagogue and the harbor, and he had business of his own. He had partners. He had employees. He owned boats. He was no slouch like we often think of him as. I'm giving a talk at Legatus's summit in February, and it's going to be about Peter the businessman and how he's very different than I think.
Yeah, you've done that for us here before. I love that. And I don't think a lot of people think of it that way in terms of St. Peter being a businessman, right. But you made the point, and I love this, because when he's having that experience with Jesus at my favorite place, the primacy of Peter, he still had his fishing boats. And so you brought up that point about the fishing boats. Yeah.
Yep. And when they counted every one of those stinking fish, 153, and they were pretty obsessed with those fish, because that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why Jesus said, "Do you love me more than these? Are you going to go back to your old business, or are you going to leave that and follow me now?" But so you have one that smells like books and one that smells like fish. But Peter had the qualities of a leader, outspoken, bold, courageous, ready to step out. He had his character flaws as well. And Paul was the same. He was as strong as you could think. He said, according to the law, I was blameless. I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. I come straight from the blood of the Hebrews. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, which was the warrior tribe. And don't think Paul wasn't like a warrior. And he's in that academic, and they both had a wonderful pedigree. They both had Jewish pedigree. So they're called Peter to go to the circumcised, which means the Jewish people. He ends up going all up through Asia Minor area, which is today Turkey, and ends up in Rome, where he then establishes the church in Rome. And on the other hand, you've got Paul, who travels all over the place. He was hard to make a movie on, because I had to go to 6 countries just to do his life, because he's in all these countries. But he went all over the place, founding churches and writing and teaching, and then he ends up also in prison in Rome. But then both of them together as brothers, as twins, as highly respecting of each other, they were both taken out and killed on the same day. So that's a little bit about the similarities and the differences. I picture Peter as a big man, a big older man, because it says that he dragged all 153 fish up on the shore by himself, and it makes a point that was a huge catch. And a lot of people think, well, the only way he could have dragged that up on his own would be he's pretty big and strong guy. Whereas Paul, the only description we have of him is he's probably just a little over 5 feet tall, and he's got bow legs, and he's got a bald head and a beard and a long hooked nose. And it said that he only had one eyebrow. It starts at one side and went all the way across to the other side.
So he wasn't the most attractive of men, right?
No, he wasn't, no. And so, but I see them two physically very different as well, being very physically different. Academically, they were very different. According to their careers and their upbringing and training, one was a scholar, one was a fisherman. But boy, when Jesus called them, they worked together. And the two of those guys together changed the world.
They did.
We only have 2 writings of Peter, but the whole book of the first part of Acts is his sermons, and he's teaching and preaching. Paul, on the other hand, half the books of the New Testament were written by him, and 2 of them were written by his associate Luke, which are the 2 longest books in the New Testament, by the way. Luke and Acts are the 2 longest books written by Paul's associate, and Paul himself wrote more than half of the books of the New Testament.
Well, let me ask you another apologetics question, trying to understand and being able to relate to our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, and as you were once one many years ago. So we know you just mentioned the writers of New Testament, Acts of the Apostles, and those so many letters which they're credited with. But here's the thing. They were working together. That's obvious if you read Scripture. And even though there was less from St. Peter than Paul, it seems that if you talk to a Protestant about the New Testament, they're very Paulian, but they're not very Petrine. Yeah. They don't seem to acknowledge St. Peter nearly as much, and barely nearly as much as they acknowledge and talk about St. Paul. And yet they were so important together.
They were, and I would say that, again, those blue-tinted sunglasses, the whole...
Yeah, but what I don't understand is they're so scriptural. They're like, Bible alone, basic instructions before leaving Earth. And so it's like, okay, well, this isn't working for us to be, based on Peter. We have to concentrate on Paul. It doesn't make sense when they kind of move it around to fit their own needs. That's just my perspective,
You're absolutely correct. And I was so impressed, I'll have to say, when I went into the Catholic Mass the first time with the Crestas in the January 1st of 1994, and they came up holding the Gospels. But there wasn't the whole New Testament. They were holding the Gospels up over their head, and they were going to read the Gospels. And in the Catholic Church, the Gospels always hold a place of primacy. Yes, we know the Old Testament is inspired, infallible Word of God, and so are the whole 27 books of the New Testament. But those 4 Gospels are the words of the Lord himself, and those always held primacy. So I always was impressed by that the Catholics did that. The Protestants tend to hold Paul's writings as a primacy, and even to the neglect of the Gospels and the words of the Lord, because Jesus said, if you don't do these things, that you will go into the fires of hell. And but he was just speaking to the Jews, not to the world, so we have to go to Paul to find out what the truth really is. So a lot of times there's that dilemma. And also, as when Peter's often presented as the Pope, as the leader of the church, and with this Catholic emphasis. So a lot of times Protestants, when they see the pendulum swing one way, they view, the Catholics swing that pendulum way over here about Peter. They tend to swing it back the other way. Same with Mary. So the Catholics swing the pendulum over to great honor and reverence for Mary. Protestants tend to swing it the other way and ignore her altogether. So that's, I think, what happens with Peter and Paul. But the reality is that they worked together, they served together. Paul had great respect for Peter, because he even says that I went up to Jerusalem and I didn't see anyone except Cephas, and I received the right hand of fellowship, so that I knew that what I was preaching was true. In other words, even though Jesus had given him the gospel and told him what to preach, he still came to Jerusalem and received the right hand of fellowship, or the imprimatur, of the bishops, Peter and the apostles in Rome, before he continued to take his message out. And then when the church in Acts chapter 15, under the leadership of Peter, they made a decision about how Gentiles could be saved without being circumcised. It was the first church council. Paul was there, and Paul was sent by Peter and the apostles to take the letter out to everybody else. So they worked together, and Paul respected the leadership of Peter and the apostles. He said that he was one that was born too late. In other words, I think what he meant by that is, I wish I'd have been born a little earlier. Maybe Jesus would have included me in the 12. But even there, it's a funny thing, Teresa, because a lot of us Baptists thought that choosing Matthias as a replacement for Judas was a big problem, because Jesus had already chosen Paul, but Peter cast lots and jumped the gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting. It really is interesting, though, because of the way, that when Paul became an apostle, because Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus, unlike Peter, who was right there with Jesus in all of his years of his ministry.
Yes. And Paul, it says that he left for 14 years. We don't know where he went. We just know that he was away for 14 years. It says that he went to Arabia, which is where Mount Sinai is. And I think in my movie, I contend with the idea that he actually, during those 14 years in Galatia, he says Mount Sinai is in Arabia, which included Sinai of today, by the way, and that Sinai was in Arabia. So I think that Paul went there during those 14 years. God was preparing him and training him. He's already a scholar. He already knows the Old Testament. But sometimes out in the desert is where God really can work in your life. And Moses was in the desert, and he had this great work done in his life. And Paul, I think, also went into the desert for 14 years. Then when he came back, he was in Damascus, and it says that he was praying and they were serving the Lord. And by the way, that word in Greek is liturgio, liturgy, the server,
Right.
the work of the people. That's right there in Acts chapter 13. And from there, it says that they laid hands on him and Barnabas, and they sent them out. It's so interesting. He says, set apart for me Saul and Barnabas. That's what the word Pharisee means. Paul was a Pharisee. Now he's being set apart as a real Pharisee, and send them out. That's what apostle means, one who is sent. So right there in one verse, you have the word Pharisee and apostle. Jesus is turning Paul into a real Pharisee, and he's sending him out as an apostle. And now he's working side by side with Peter, although they went in their different directions. They had the same Lord, the same gospel. They all had one baptism, and they worked together as a team, all of them.
Yeah, and the churches, too, are just so important. And I want to encourage people, well, to get your books, go to your website, CatholicComfort.com, because especially in your book, Upon This Rock. But when they come to Italy, to make sure they give themselves enough time for St. Peter's and, of course, St. Paul outside the walls. Steve, this went by way too fast. Look forward to our next interview. Our very own Steve Ray, CatholicComfort.com, on the important feast day this week of Saints Peter and Paul. Pray for us. Thanks so much for tuning in to hour number 1 of EWTN's Catholic Connection on a Monday, June 29th, the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. Beautiful day in the church. Coming up in hour number 2 in our 2 cent segment, a little bit more on what we were discussing in the first part of the program at 15 minutes past. A clip from the press conference on Friday talking about how the Establishment Clause has been misunderstood and misused for so many years, and how this administration, in terms of what they're giving us in this commission in their final report, are new recommendations to help people truly understand how that clause and how the First Amendment is supposed to be applied. And then we're going to have a wonderful in-studio interview with Father Joseph Spence on his book, Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. So I'm very excited about this. He is back at the ranch in Irondale at our headquarters in Alabama, because he's going to be taping some interviews today, and he joins us for 2 segments. So I do hope you can tune in for EWTN's Radio Extra coming up in just a few minutes. And don't forget, stay cool. I know I sound like Auntie T here, but I'm telling you, if you start to have weather like we're having here in Italy, 100 degrees with humidity plus, it's really rough. Really rough. So make sure you take care of yourself. Don't do too much, and be careful, because they're saying it's going to get worse before it gets better. We'll have an update for you on the weather. But then, of course, don't let it dampen your big 4th of July activities. Also, you want to stay tuned to EWTN. I don't know if you heard Peter Gagnon on Friday, but we've got some amazing programming coming up all week long. Radio, TV, online, and more. And we'll be right back with hour number 2. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And it's the second hour of Catholic Connection here on EWTN's Radio Extra on a Monday, June 29th, the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. Hope you're doing well. I just wanted to share with you, I was just looking at my Magnificat. I love the Magnificat, and I'm always using it for my readings. And I do have the app and also the hard copy, because I'm still kind of old school. So did you read, if you have your Magnificat, the comments or the opening before the Mass on the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul? Among the 12 apostles, Peter became the spokesman as when he boldly declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In the list of the apostles, he is always given precedence, and at Pentecost he delivers the first fiery sermon of the infant church. Although not one of the 12, Paul is also called an apostle. By his own admission, he was the apostle born abnormally, 1 Corinthians 15:8, having encountered the resurrected Jesus as he rode to persecute the Christians of Damascus. Paul's mission field was a vast Gentile territory in the eastern Mediterranean. Both men martyred in Rome around the year 64. So it's a beautiful day to celebrate the founders of our church, of course, and the beautiful faith that we have, especially as witnessed through Saints Peter and Paul. Pray for us on this Monday, June 29th. Alrighty then, after the two-set segment, we'll dive a little bit more deeply, even more than we gave you in the first hour. We have a clip from the press conference on Friday. The Religious Liberty Commission, which included Bishop Robert Barron, wrapping up their year-long, almost 13-month-long investigation where they heard testimonies, did a lot of research, and they came up with 12 recommendations. So we have a clip from the Lieutenant Governor of Texas who talks about the misuse and misunderstanding of the First Amendment. And then at the bottom of the hour, and for two segments today, we have the delightful opportunity to chat with Father Joseph Spence. He is in studio in Irondale at our beautiful headquarters there because he's doing some interviews on his new book, Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. I'm really excited to talk to him for a number of reasons. I love the Carmelite saints, especially St. Teresa of Avila and St. Therese, but also because he, at the age of 18 years old, moved to Italy to join the Franciscan family of Mary Immaculate and was ordained a Catholic priest in the city of Fermo, which is in the region of Marche, which is just to the east of us here in Umbria. And he actually completed his master's degree in Milano on Mary and the Spiritual Experience of St. Francis, and later completed his doctoral spiritual theology at Carmelite University in Rome regarding the influence of St. John of the Cross on St. Therese of Lisieux, the Little Flowers. So it should be a great conversation. And again, the title of the book available, of course, at the EWTN Religious Catalog, The Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. Alrighty then, what's the weather look like before we get to the news this morning on a Monday? Dangerous to record-breaking heat will build across the center of the nation and slowly build eastward this week. Wildfire conditions remain critical for the southwest and portions of the Great Basin through today. And for the northern plains and the upper Midwest, they're saying severe thunderstorms with the potential for large to very large hail, and severe winds are the primary concerns there. It is a Monday. We appreciate you. Time to get to the news at 3 minutes past the hour here on EWTN's Radio Extra. Rescue efforts continuing in Venezuela as officials fear the death toll will continue to rise from Wednesday's massive earthquakes. More than 1,400 people confirmed dead. Nearly 69,000 others remain missing. Search and rescue teams from the U.S. and around the world are working around the clock to find victims in the collapsed buildings. The State Department says the U.S. is sending $150 million in aid to Venezuela, with more financial help likely to follow. The Religious Liberty Commission, established by the President, has presented its recommendations that happened on Friday. The panel created last year by the President in an effort to, according to the group, stop the suppression of people of religion in the U.S.
It is only appropriate that we work to strengthen this fundamental right and to most essentially have liberty for generations to come. We want religious liberty. We want liberty, but we also want religious liberty.
The group's chair, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, said the phrase separation of church and state, which is not in the First Amendment but mentioned in a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, has been misused to punish people of faith. One of the group's recommendation, by the way, is for the Justice Department to instruct properly the guidance of the Establishment Clause. Pope Leo XIV delivering a special video message to Catholics across the U.S. at the conclusion of the 2026 National Eucharistic Pilgrimage. That will mark a historic moment as the nation will be celebrating, of course, the 250th anniversary of its founding. Holy Father's message will be shown this Sunday at the opening of the closing Mass and Eucharistic procession in Philadelphia. That's where thousands of pilgrims, as EWTN News explains, are expected to gather after a 6-week journey across the eastern U.S. According to the organizers, the Pope's address will reflect on the legacy of Catholicism in our country while encouraging the faithful to seek renewed unity, peace, and hope through Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. And during the Mass for the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul today, the Holy Father inviting the faithful to be inspired by the two patrons of Rome who, despite their flaws, became extraordinary witnesses of the gospel. He also invites the new metropolitan archbishops receiving their pallium to imitate the Lord and to be good shepherds of the faithful entrusted to them. Looking to these saints, he suggested, can teach us how to promote unity and serve truth in charity. The Pope recalling that in this spirit they were about to celebrate the ancient and moving rite of the conferral of the pallia on the metropolitan archbishops. He said these brands of white wool adorned with crosses indeed express the commitment of every shepherd and also of every Christian to take upon their shoulders the brothers and sisters entrusted to them like so many lambs of the Lord's flock, and to sacrifice their energy, time, effort, and even their lives for them. The U.S. and Iran agreeing to stand down, at least temporarily, and allow ships to move freely through the Strait of Hormuz. The officials say the technical discussions will continue. Meanwhile, on Friday, Iran asserted control over the strait, warning that safe passage would only be guaranteed for vessels coordinating with its government. The escalation followed President Trump's accusation that Iran struck a commercial ship near Oman with a one-way attack drone, prompting U.S. Central Command to launch additional retaliatory strikes. And Mike Waltz says the U.S. will militarily take down Iran's infrastructure if Tehran tries to control the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. ambassador to the UN made that comment during his appearance yesterday on Fox News.
The Iranian regime thinks for a second that President Trump is going to stand by, while Iran continues to attack international shipping without a response, or our bases without a response. They're sadly mistaken.
Waltz added that discussions between the two countries are ongoing and that President Trump will always give diplomacy a chance. It comes as the U.S. and Iran have been training attacks. In a post on Truth Social Saturday, Trump also writing, there may come a point when we no longer are able to be reasonable and we will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started. And a memorial service taking place today for the 8 people who died when a B-52 bomber crashed 2 weeks ago at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff on June 15th while on a routine test mission. The cause of the crash remains under investigation. And Lisa Carton tells us 14 Saudi nationals are dead after the crash of a helicopter operated by a major state-run oil giant.
The crash happened Sunday in Ras Tanura, west of the Strait of Hormuz. A spokesman for the Ministry of Energy says the company started crude oil loadings Friday after a 4-month pause. The cause of the deadly crash is under investigation. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest exporter of oil. I'm Lisa Carton.
House Speaker Mike Johnson saying he's sending the bipartisan housing bill to the president today. Johnson making the comments during an appearance on Fox Sunday Morning Futures. This after the president canceled a planned signing of the bill. That happened last week.
Passed by both chambers. I'm sending it to him on Monday, and it will become law. And I certainly want him to take the biggest, boldest marker that he has and do that big Trump signature proudly on that legislation.
The bill, meant to cut away some of the red tape and make it easier to build homes, sailed through the House and Senate and was set to be signed by Trump last week before the ceremony was canceled. In a post on Truth Social, the president said he would not sign the bill again until the Safe America Act is passed. That voting bill would require ID in order to vote. And 3 U.S. wildland fire service fighters have been killed battling raging fires along the Colorado-Utah border. Officials say 2 other crew members are hospitalized with injuries while fighting the flames on Saturday. 2 smaller fires are now part of the larger Snyder Fire, which is burning over 28,000 acres and at this point is 0% contained. That's as recently as of last night. The governors of both Colorado and Utah declaring emergencies due to the red flag conditions with winds gusting to 50 miles per hour across the area. And a mega heat dome is set to hit the eastern half of the U.S. this week and last well into the big 4th of July weekend. Forecasters are saying 2 small heat domes will collide, making for one large heat dome that will send temperatures soaring. Today, cities including Minneapolis, St. Louis, Chicago, to as far south as Little Rock, Arkansas, could see temperatures topping, getting close to 100 degrees in the mid to upper 90s. The dome will expand and also intensify by Wednesday, and other cities, including Philadelphia, New York, Washington, D.C., and more, could hit the triple digits. And, unfortunately, the news gets worse before it gets better. The heat dome could spark tropical storm development near the southern U.S. in the Atlantic and the Gulf. Matt Madison tells us diagnosis of gambling disorder on the rise in states that have legalized sports betting.
It's recognized as a mental health condition in which patients often cannot stop gambling despite the growing distress and harm they experience. A new study from Epic Research says diagnoses rose more than 60% since 2018, with the biggest increase among young men. Data also showed a decline in diagnoses in the 11 states that did not legalize sports betting, with cases dropping by about 30% from 2018 to March 2026. Sports betting has exploded across the U.S. following a landmark Supreme Court ruling that paved the way for states to legalize online sports books. I'm Matt Mattinson.
The shingles vaccine may provide significant protection from dementia in older adults. That, according to a study out of Brown University. The lead author, Dr. Kaylee Hughes, finding that 1 in 17 dementia cases could possibly be prevented by shingles vaccination. They say it's an important finding because, according to the CDC, 99% of Americans born in 1980 or earlier had chickenpox, which is caused by a virus that triggers both chickenpox and shingles. And finally, in our news segment this morning, Wendy Swanson says TSA bracing to screen nearly 19 million air travelers across the 4th of July holiday period.
A TSA senior official says security checkpoints are fully staffed and prepared to welcome travelers and handle the large passenger volumes during the June 30th through July 6th period. The highest traffic is expected on July 2nd, with an expected 3 million people traveling through airports that day. The agency recommends travelers arrive early and check with their airline before their departure. I'm Wendy Swanson.
It is a Monday, and we are entering into a very important time in our country. We've actually been building toward this for months and months, the 250th anniversary, which is coming up this weekend, July 4th, obviously. There are going to be some amazing programs and interviews all week long on a number of different outlets associated with us, whether it's EWTN News Nightly or Global Catholic Radio or The Register or Church Pop or In Depth or special programming across the board on TV and radio. You don't want to miss it. All of it can be found at EWTN.com. We'll be right back. Catholic Connection. It is a Monday morning at 16 minutes past the hour on June 29th. Great to be with you. And of course, so much going on in our country and our world, and talking an awful lot about religious liberty. Not only in the church, the Pope, as you heard, is going to be giving a special address, a message at the end of the big Eucharistic pilgrimage this weekend. Pretty exciting. You'll find that story on EWTNnews.com, talking about Catholicism and U.S. history. There was a major press conference at the White House on Friday afternoon, and I was talking about this in the first hour of the program as well, where the members of the newly formed Religious Liberty Commission established by the Trump administration came together after 13 months of studying, hearing testimony, investigating, and looking at religious liberty in the United States of America right now. They came together on Friday to issue their latest report and to give us 12 recommendations. And one of the biggest points being made by all the members, but especially the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, who commented first after the press conference, after the president spoke at the press conference on Friday, was talking about how misused and misunderstood the First Amendment truly is. And I see that over and over and over again. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to address it. If you go to the Department of Justice and put in /religious liberty, or if you go to any of the reports that we've had the last few days on the press conference on Friday, they will give you a hyperlink to the summary report, okay, of the commission, the Religious Liberty Commission. But with that in mind, I do want to have Tom Price play the clip of the Lieutenant Governor talking about how basically the misunderstanding, maybe it's a misunderstanding, maybe it's purposeful, only God can judge, but whatever, the interpretation, the incorrect interpretation regarding the Establishment Clause has been used to beat people of faith over the head, sometimes figuratively, other times even more seriously. Let's take a listen to what the Lieutenant Governor of Texas has to say about what they're trying to do in terms of helping us better understand the Constitution, especially the First Amendment.
It was just 13 months ago when we stood in the Rose Garden. Now it's an incredibly beautiful Rose Garden today. We just stood there and we talked about religious liberty and that no president in our history has stood more for God than this president. He has been unashamed to speak the word of Jesus. He's been unashamed to speak up for all faiths. And he established this commission so that we would assure Americans that religious liberty, that this great inheritance from our founding fathers, would continue for another 250 years. And Mr. President, we believe this will be one of your greatest legacies, and you happen to be the perfect president to be here in the 250th celebration. The question is, what is religious liberty? It's our conscience. It's that little voice inside of us that tells us right from wrong. It's that voice that when we're in trouble we can talk to in our quiet moments. It's that voice when we feel unloved and alone that can comfort us through a higher power. When governments can take away your religious liberty, they're putting their hand in your heart and taking everything you believe in. And if governments can do that, then they become God. The president spoke earlier today of the communist threat in this country. We know what communists do around the world. They remove God. They close the churches. They punish the believers. And so this is so important at this point in time in history. And we didn't know about this communist movement a year ago when we were here. But this is the perfect time to stand up and say to America, you have been given this great inheritance and you deserve to have religious liberty. The key is that after 103 witnesses, after 7 months of testimony, after 200 pages of testimony that we're delivering today, we found there was one constant theme. The overwhelming majority of our witnesses said that they were attacked and punished, and what was used against them was one phrase that's not in the Constitution, and that phrase is separation of church and state. The left has used that one phrase that was one line out of one of hundreds of letters by Thomas Jefferson to batter and hammer people of faith for the last 70 to 80 years. And this report will speak very clearly that we want to be sure Americans understand that they cannot be attacked by that phrase any longer. So we have 12 recommendations. I'll read the first 6.
12 recommendations, and I have them right here. I can go through them quickly. But first, a little bit more from this a very important report, and I highly recommend you take a look at it. Justice.gov/Religious Liberty Commission, or again, you can go to any of our news sources, which have a summary of it as well. In recent years, as you heard Dan Patrick say, Americans from all religious backgrounds have faced increasing persecutions for their religious beliefs. The commission, for example, heard from mothers who were lied to by their children's school administrators, children who were bullied because of their religious beliefs, healthcare workers who have risked losing their jobs due to religious objections to certain procedures, a grandson of Holocaust survivors who was restricted from public spaces because of his Jewish faith, nuns who were targeted by New York State and workers, including military service members who lost pensions and life savings when forced to choose between their faith and vaccine mandates, among many others. And they give a few examples. They say elementary student Shay Insanis was bullied for standing up for his Christian faith, and he was forced to read his peer a book that told him he could choose his gender. The school refused to help and doubled down on pushing gender ideology onto students. The teacher was told she had to remove a cross near her desk or lose her job. An 11-year-old girl was pressured by school authorities to believe she was a boy. A Navy SEAL lost his pension when he was just 3 years away from retirement eligibility because he objected to the COVID-19 vaccine. A doctor was indicted by the Biden administration, the Justice Department, for blowing the whistle on Texas Children's Hospital's gender mutilization of surgeries for minors. Another person was targeted at Harvard's campus simply for being Jewish. And Lacey Smith was fired from her flight attendant's position on Alaska Airlines because she answered the invitation to respectfully share her thoughts on the Equality Act. And yes, this is happening in the United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave. And this week, of course, we are celebrating our 250th anniversary. It is a great celebration, but we have to be aware, as the Lieutenant Governor of Texas said, of what's happening in our country, and we can't rest on our laurels. So 12 opportunities to strengthen religious liberty for all Americans. This is from the committee. Instruct the Department of Justice to issue guidance clarifying the proper understanding of the Establishment Clause and separation of church and state and what that means. Number 2, the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission shall issue Know Your Rights posters for students, parents, public school teachers and administrators, religious leaders, religious institutions, healthcare workers, and military service members. Number 3, any public official who alleges a person under their supervision has improperly engaged in religious expression must provide written explanation of the violation. Number 4, instruct the Department of Justice, Department of HHS, and EEOC to create religious liberty violation reporting hotlines and online portals. Nominate and confirm federal judges, number 5, with the courage to decide religious liberty cases on their merits. Number 6, ask the DOJ to create a religious liberty task force to track and prioritize litigation protecting religious liberty. Number 7, combat anti-Semitism. Number 8, protect religious Americans from governmental-led litigation targeting their free exercise. 9, repeal the Johnson Amendment. 10, order the Department of War to streamline and improve religious accommodations. 11, continue to restore the retirement or reenactment eligibility for service members who lost employment, health insurance, and pensions related to their position on the vaccine. And 12, honor the courage of religious liberty heroes through creating a Presidential Medal of Religious Liberty and First Freedom Hero Awards to recognize those who stand up for religious freedom and play an indispensable role in protecting our constitutional rights. Amen. What a great thing to really study and pray about and maybe be involved in, especially this week. We'll be right back. Studio guest this morning, Father Joseph Spence, will be taping At Home with Jim and Joy, which is awesome. And it will air this week. We'll give you more detail on the times a little bit later on. But Father Spence was born and raised in New York State. At 18 years old, he moved to Italy to join the Franciscan family of Mary Immaculate, inspired by Mother Maria Elisabetta Patrizzi, ordained a Catholic priest in 2015 in Italy. And after completing his master's degree in Milano, he went on to study even further and also received his doctorate in spiritual theology at the Carmelite University in Rome, and that had to do with the influence of St. John of the Cross on St. Therese. And he has a beautiful book, Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. Father, it's so nice to chat with you. And the minute I saw your bio, I'm like, oh boy, we have a lot to talk about, although I want to stay focused on the topic at hand. But one question I have off the right out of the gate is, when you think of St. John of the Cross, you don't think of the little flower, you think of the big Therese, Teresa of Avila. So apparently St. John had a big influence on the little flower as well, correct?
She did, big influence. Well, it's a long story, but she checked out his spiritual canticle and the Living Flame of Love from the monastery library when she was only 16 years old, seeking light and inspiration after her father fell gravely ill. And she found that in St. John of the Cross and kept it with her until even on the bedside table of her bed in the infirmary when she was dying. So he accompanied her all along her life.
So what attracted you to the spirituality of Saint Therese? Why? There's so many. I mean, she's a great saint, obviously, and a doctor of the church. But what was it about her particular style of spirituality that drew you to her and to write a book about her?
Well, there's a background in that. I mean, one of my sisters encouraged me to read The Story of a Soul when I was a teenager, and that really struck me. And then I joined my order, whose patron saints are Colby, some explain Colby, and Saint Therese. So she's kind of our spiritual mother, together with our foundress, and then Saint Francis and Clare and Saint John of the Cross and Therese of Avila. So they're kind of our spiritual ancestors, as it were. And then it just worked out as a theme for my doctoral thesis. It had never really been deepened enough, and so that was that. Now I've been teaching on her for 3 years, so yeah.
So I want people to get Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. But if you could, can you just highlight them for us? And that'll encourage, I'm sure, people to get the book. And it's published by TAN. It's available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. And, of course, you're going to get some great exposure as well on the Jim and Joy Show at Home with Jim and Joy. We want people to get the book. But 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. You probably could have written 6 books, or one on each.
You're definitely right. You're definitely right. You always have to synthesize.
All right, let's start with number 1.
Definitely. So the first chapter is dedicated to, of course, her little way, which is the doctrine that she wanted to spread around, and she slowly discovered that. I kind of compacted it into just a few pages, but there's a long journey that Therese made. Some people think that she discovered it only in 1894, a few years before her death, but really it was maturing in her since her childhood. I mean, she was the last of 9 children, but 5 survived. So that she was always considered kind of the baby of the family. That influenced her, but obviously that's not enough at all. I mean, there's a really deep spiritual meaning to that. Her father had a huge influence on her. We all need to thank St. Louis Martin for the spirituality that we healthily breathe today, because she was struck by her father's tenderness and holiness and goodness, and that really helped her to understand how good God the Father is. Paradoxically, it's when she lost her father that she actually started turning to God the Father in a more explicit way. So that's also a sign of hope for the world today, for all those fatherless children around, There were many influences, but she was confirmed in all of that when she found a couple of scriptural passages of the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and the book of Proverbs, speaking about children being caressed in their mother's arms and small children coming to God. And that was like the final kind of spark that ignited that flame in her in realizing just how close God is to each of us. She said, I feel that God is more tender than a mother, And she deepened that in the last years of her life, and that became kind of the message she wanted to spread around.
Now, you also talk in the book, before we get to the other keys in this, in terms of her spirituality, her dedication to the Holy Face. Obviously, we're talking about the Holy Face of Christ, but is there a particular image? Because I know people will think of, for example, in my travels to Italy and leading pilgrimage, we've taken many people to Montepello. Of course, there's the shroud. There are many images that the Lord has left us to come and see. Is there a particular image upon which she meditated?
Yes. Well, I teach on the shroud, so
okay.
I would have liked that.
I've seen it twice. Yeah.
I would have liked that influenced her. It did influence her sister Celine, who drew a beautiful portrait of the Shroud of Turin, because Therese died a year before the shroud really exploded in 1898 with the first photograph of the shroud. So Celine actually drew a picture of the shroud and was awarded for that in 1906, if I'm not mistaken. But actually, Therese was influenced by the Veil of Veronica in St. Peter's Basilica. This devotion only surprisingly started spreading around in France only 30 years before Therese was born. There had been a miraculous event in St. Peter's Basilica where the Veronica's veil had suddenly started emitting light from itself for various hours, and just flocks of people went to see this miracle. News spread around Europe quickly, and Mr. Dupont, who was a pious French man, really propagated and spread this devotion around. He founded the Arch Confraternity of the Holy Face. And Therese, when she was 12, she subscribed to that together with her whole family. But even then, another surprising fact, so she was devoted to the Holy Face. Her sister Pauline explained the roots of the devotion to the Holy Face, in the Bible and all that. But she really only started being devoted to it in a special way, again, when her father fell ill. She found, together with St. John of the Cross, those were the two spotlights that led her on the way in the midst of those great sufferings and humiliations. Her father had been hallucinating. He took out his revolver thinking there was a battle raging in Lisieux. He was then, the same day, he was interned in the psychiatric ward of the hospital nearby. So there was a huge humiliation for the family, and she turned to the Holy Face, realizing that Jesus was participating his passion and his sufferings, his humiliations, to her father and to the whole family.
Yeah, and she wants us to remember, and you say this in the book, how devotion to the Holy Face can deepen our understanding and our union with the Lord in terms of his suffering, right?
Exactly, absolutely. I mean, it's gazing on his face that we discover who we are and the sense of suffering.
You know, there's so much to her, and she died so young, and yet she was so deep. And even though she was very deep and had such an incredible spirituality, I love the fact that she's known for a simple way. As a matter of fact, I meant to tell you this. I forgot to mention it when we were chatting during the break, that the little village in which my husband and I live, even though it's obviously in Italy, in Umbria, it's actually dedicated to St. Therese of Lisieux, and they have a wonderful procession at the end of May each year, and they have images of her all over. And they chose her. There was actually a miracle. I'm trying to nail it down, but with my Italian, that's not very good. It's getting better, but it's not there yet.
Good.
But there was some sort of a miracle associated with the healing, but also they took her on as a patron because most of the people in this area are farmers, and they feel their simple life of farming and their simple ways is connected to St. Therese. Isn't that neat?
That's beautiful. I mean, she took care to. She wanted to be simple. It was a choice to be simple, a conscious choice, and she purposefully wanted to not have any phenomena that could be extraordinary or could be considered discouraging to the flock of little souls that she wanted her to follow. She wanted could follow her.
Much more to our discussion coming up with Father Joseph Spence and the beautiful book, Living the Little Way, Spirituality of St. Therese. We got through one of them. Hopefully we can get through all 6, at least to highlight, because we want you to get the book. And it's published, speaking of books, by our friends at TAN. We'll be right back. Continuing our conversation with our in-studio guest, Father Joseph Spence, regarding his book, Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. St. Therese of Lisieux, of course, Little Flower. Okay, Father, we got through number 1. Let's see how many of these we can get through, although we still want people to pick up the book. Okay, number 2 in terms of her keys to the spirituality.
Right. Well, the second chapter is dedicated to her experience of the child Jesus and the Holy Face. We talked about that a little bit regarding the Holy Face. And I don't know if you want to deepen that or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so people know, because there's so many different images. We have the Shroud of Turin, right?
Yep.
And you said you teach on that. And then we have the Holy Face, which is related to St. Veronica. We have the Veil in Montepello. We have also the Veil in Spain. People get confused with Orvieto in Italy and Orvieto in Spain. Yeah. So there's a difference. There's many different images out there, but this particular one is related to the devotion of the Holy Face connected to St. Veronica, correct?
Yes, exactly. So the Veil of Veronica, then called the Holy Face of Tours, because that's where Mr. Dupont was from, and that's where he kind of spread this devotion. So it's the Holy Face of Tours is the one in same Veil of Veronica, which has been in St. Peter's Basilica since the 1200s. As a shroud scholar, I don't want to go too far off the lines here, but I didn't really even talk about this in the book. But as a shroud scholar, many shroud scholars, and I agree with them, in dialogue, of course, with iconologists and iconographers and all that, we tendentially think that the original image of Jesus' face as we know it today is actually that of the shroud, and the many, many copies that there have been in history and throughout the world are literally copies, more or less faithful, of the Shroud of Turin.
It is amazing. So what led you to study? I don't want to get off track either, but I love the Shroud. I've had the ability through tours that we've done to venerate it twice and take groups there. What got you interested in the Shroud?
Well, again, my foundress, she encouraged me because she had founded the Roman Center for Shroud Studies in 1976, together with Monsignor Giulio Ricci, who was a shroud expert at the time. And a lot of what's going on in the shroud world today finds its historical root in that center. So she also encouraged me to get into the shroud, and I became passionate about it as well.
The thing that amazes me about the shroud is it's pretty hard to dispute once you start studying it and looking at it and seeing all the work that is, even though they had, of course, a couple of studies that tried to dispute it and say that it was it was a forgery.
Yeah.
To this day, there really is no explanation except that of some sort of radiation at that moment of resurrection when the image had to be, that's the only way, if you think about it, that something like that could have happened.
Exactly. I mean, besides the blood marks, which are all over the place,
Right.
of a, scourged, crowned with thorns, crucified man, that's real human blood of the AB blood group. And then you have, this light energy that somehow accelerated the process of aging of the linen. And that would have taken 34,000 billion watts of energy in a split second to do that. So
Yeah. Father Spitzer does a great examination of the shrouds. Father Robert Spitzer, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Okay, let's move on to number 3 in the keys of St. Therese's spirituality featured in your book.
Yeah, so then I focused on Jesus as spouse. I feel that's a really neglected area of studies on Therese. A lot has been written about her little way, and rightly so, because that's the doctrine that she really wanted to. That was her message that she herself wanted to get out there. But she has such a rich personality and such a rich spirituality that it's basically it's hard to to get down to the bottom, really. So Jesus as spouse. I mean, if you flip through her complete works, so that's not only the story of a soul, but that's also all of her letters. She wrote, I think, 254 letters. She wrote 54 poems. She wrote 8 plays or sketches for her fellow sisters. She wrote 21 prayers. And then there's, of course, the last conversations that her sisters transcribed in the last months of her life. So if you flip through all of that, you'll see that she speaks of Jesus as her spouse all the time. That was a common conception of the time. So even her and St. Elizabeth of the Trinity, I also teach on St. Elizabeth of the Trinity, who's less well known, Carmelite French nun, same time period. They would, when they would put their habit on, the religious habit, they would enter the church for the ceremony dressed as brides. So they would be dressed literally in a bride gown as a bride of Jesus. So that was a common conception of the time. But she went well above and beyond that in the intensity of her relationship with Jesus as her spouse. And I really think that can resonate with everyone because, if you flip through the Bible, you'll see that spousal love is there from the book of Genesis to the Revelations, and really it describes each soul's relationship with God. It's the best image to describe that deep relationship with the Lord that we're all called to have.
And also with the priesthood and religious life, I mean, the church is the bride and Jesus is the bridegroom. And of course, in St. Therese as a religious sister, married to the bridegroom as in Christ and as the spouse, being a spouse of his church and of him. And that is why it's so important for people, I think, to take a look at this. Maybe they would understand better why the church teaches what she teaches on marriage.
Oh, yeah. I think it would help us to understand our identity in every walk of life, because all Christians are called to this deep spousal relationship with the Lord first and foremost, and married people, of course, with their spouses. That could also shed a lot of light on religious life. Now I'm going to quote kind of my master on St. Therese, Father Littell. He's still alive. He's a Carmelite father, great expert on Therese. He's retired now, working in Lisieux. So he said, this is his opinion, but he said that religious life. He feels that he's been religious for more than 50 years, that it went into crisis in Europe, at least in 1968, with the sexual revolution. Mm-hmm. And when religious people, consecrated nuns and friars and stuff, stopped realizing the importance of their spousal relationship with Jesus, that's what kind of put into crisis religious life. At least that's his take on it.
Wow. Or you see these stories, whenever a story comes up about the problems in the Catholic Church and how churches are closing, people jump to the conclusion that, well, if you would ordain women as priests, you wouldn't have this problem. Huh? And my response to that is, first of all, it's a very deep misunderstanding. If you understood, as you said, that relationship, that spousal relationship, it would make all the difference. But secondly, what's happening in these high Anglican churches, where they allow everything under the sun, including bishops and priests, women to be ordained? They're imploding. They're not growing. They're not staying open. They're in a huge crisis. So people cannot connect the dots here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just ideologies and ignorance breeds a lot of bad things.
But if they would just take the time and pray and read what the church has to say. And the beautiful writings of someone like a St. Therese, I think, would make all the difference. Okay, number 4.
Yeah. So I then talked about her relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary, which I found touching. I mean, it's been beautiful to deepen Therese in her life, and I really think she's a sign of hope, for the world today. It's true, she died 1897, so some people might think that don't know her, well, she died 125, more than 130 years ago, but she's so modern in the sense that she has a lot to say. I mean, she was an orphan. Again, I was talking about her father, who fell ill when she was 16. He then died when she was 21 in 1894. That deeply influenced her. It was one of the greatest sufferings of her life, his illness and then his death. But also, even way before that, her mother died when she was only 4, So that also deeply influenced her life. She talks about this in The Story of a Soul. She fell into her whole personality changed. So she was very bubbly, she was very outgoing, of course always very clever, but then she turned inward after her mother's death, very shy, only found comfort in her own family, very sheltered environment, and that lasted until what she calls the day of her conversion on Christmas Eve, when she was 13 going on 14. So basically, to make a long story short, she had a lot of mothers. She had her wet nurse, of course. Zelly, her mother, was unable to breastfeed her because she had breast cancer. So she was brought to her wet nurse out in the countryside, a long way from her family, for 15 months. Came back, lost her mother when she was 4. Her second mother, Pauline, joined the cloister when she was 10, and that's when, shortly after, she felt gravely ill because of all these losses. That's when Our Lady appeared to her. Her sisters talk about an apparition that lasted from 4 to 5 minutes, which is the smile of the statue suddenly took life, and Our Lady appeared to her, smiled at her, and healed her from what could have been a deadly illness. In that moment, she realized that she had a mother that no one could take from her, which is Our Lady.
Aww. Oh, that's beautiful. Now, one thing about Therese is that, as you said, she became shy after some issues that happened in her life. And I think that she has this reputation of being this very quiet, demure, very quaint little thing. And yet, she was so, I think, strong. Look at what she did when going to Rome to seek the approval of the Pope,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I mean, she was a very virtuous woman, so she dominated her character according to her way of life. So the rule of Carmel was pretty strict at the time. Complete silence was abound, except for 2 hours of recreation, which meant you could start talking 2 hours a day. But she even says her sister Celine even testifies to the fact that she would often bite her lips to not say some funny remark.
How we could all relate to that one.
Yeah,
right?
Her mind was constantly working and producing funny things. She loved puns. She loved making people laugh. She had a great personality, and that really shines through, in the last months of her life in the Yellow Notebook.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left and 2 more keys of the 6 that we want to get through.
Definitely, I'll be quick. So, fraternal charity, another neglected area of studies. There's only one book on this in French, only available in French, so that's why I wrote about it. She loved everyone around her. There were no limits of that love toward everyone. That especially includes sinners and priests. She said the eve before her profession, when she was asked in the canonical examination, "Why have you come here to Carmel?" she responded, "I've come to pray for sinners and especially for priests." But what really strikes people is the way she was able to love those around her, right? Which is the true counterproof. I mean, it's easy to love people that are missionaries in China, right? Like she did. But how about those who are annoying and are rubbing your elbow day to day? And she was able to do that. Her best tactics were her best smile, keeping silent, running away when she was not able to handle it anymore, doing little favors to everyone, always smiling, never responding badly. And she has a lot of other tips to give as well.
All right, and last but not least, the 6th key to the spirituality of St. Therese.
Yes, so I entitled the 6th chapter her Passion, of course, the Passion of Christ, and her Death of Love. So not many people know how much she suffered, even in her own monastery. A month before she died, a nun said, she was told this, a nun said to another one, "Well, I wonder what they'll write about Sister Therese after she's died." I mean, in the end, she really hasn't suffered. I mean, she was pampered by her sisters. She doesn't really know what suffering is. And when Therese was told this, she said, "How good it does to me to hear man's opinion just before my death." And then she said, "I who have suffered from my very earliest infancy, So she was a hidden soul. Her sufferings were hidden because she knew how to hide them with grace and to hide them with like symbols of flowers and stuff like that. But she suffered terribly from tuberculosis, never had a morphine shot. In all of that, her lungs were consumed and then her intestines by the illness. But then there was the spiritual suffering of participating in the atheism of her today, of her age, her doubts, her excruciating doubts against the existence of heaven. And then her death of love, which she had learned from St. John of the Cross, but she realized that she was not dying as he had described, but she was dying like Christ, that is, in agony on her cross. But in the end, she died of an ecstasy, just as John of the Cross had described. That's what her sisters say.
Wow. Father, I have so many other questions, but thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on At Home with Jim and Joy this week.
You.
And Father Spence has been in studio with us, Joseph Spence, to talk about his book, Living the Little Way, 6 Keys to the Spirituality of St. Therese. You can discover the 6 spiritual keys, learn how devotion to the Holy Face can deepen your union with God, understand her radical confidence in God's mercy and her science of love, but also get to know her, as Father described, at a much more personal level, that she suffered too, but she did it all for the Lord, and that's a great example for us. We'll be right back. Father, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao, as we say here in Italy. We'll be right back. We're having a beautiful Monday. It is Monday, June 29th, 2026. Great to be with you as you wrap up the second hour of Catholic Connection on EWTN's Radio Extra. And don't forget to give a listen to, and watch, I should say, to Father Joseph Spence interview coming up with Jim and Joy. He's taping, and it'll be aired, I believe, on July 1st, so that's a little bit later this week. I believe that would be Thursday. Gosh, I can't believe 4th of July is already this week. And also, just a reminder to stay tuned to EWTN, because we have some incredible programming coming up. As a matter of fact, I just got this email with, this is so cool. I don't know if you've heard about this or not, but there's going to be, and Peter did mention this on Friday, Peter Gagnon, our president of studios, July 2nd, 8 p.m. Central Time on EWTN, 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m., 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. There is going to be an amazing discussion holding these truths again, reclaiming our founding principles, including Ben Carson, Bishop Thomas Piprocky, Archbishop Salvatore Corleone, just among the few who are going to be involved in this amazing program. And Peter did mention this on Friday. So it's just a sample of what we're going to be giving you this week, which is just phenomenal. Coming up tomorrow, in this hour, for example, we are going to be talking about the Cardinal Newman Society, and that'll be a great tie-in because of all the great things that the Cardinal Newman Society schools do to uphold the Constitution. So talk to you tomorrow, and that will be on a Tuesday. The last day of, isn't that the last day of June? Let me check my calendar. Or is there one more if we forget June 31st? Nope, that's the last day. So there you go. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Ciao, ciao.